I remember the way the rain hit the windshield like the sky had something personal against me. It was almost poetic, the kind of poetic that punches you in the gut and leaves you gasping for clarity. The leather steering wheel beneath my hands was slick with sweat, though the cold outside was biting. It had only been 37 minutes since my entire life, as I knew it, evaporated in silence. I had just learned that the 2 children I had raised, kissed goodnight, taught how to ride bikes, and watched grow teeth and lose them again, were not biologically mine. And I didn't find out from my wife. No. That would have been a mercy. I found out from a casual remark during a family health emergency. One genetic test unraveled 12 years of what I thought was fatherhood. I confronted her, heart shaking like a washing machine on a spin cycle. Her silence was confirmation. Her tears didn't clean the mess, they only smudged the truth deeper. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just walked out, sat in the car, turned the engine, and let the weight of 12 years crush me into the leather seat. I cried. I'm not the crying type. I've been through war zones, literal and emotional. I've taken punches, buried friends, and lost deals that meant everything. But this was different. This was betrayal with fingerprints. This was the death of an identity. And in that car, with the rain as witness and silence as my co-pilot, I made a choice. I wasn't going back. Not to that house. Not to that life. Not to the version of myself that accepted mediocrity just to keep peace. I was done being numb, done apologizing for being hungry for more. I had lost everything, which meant I was finally free. When I drove away that night, I didn't have a destination. Just a full tank, half a savings account, and a storm in my chest. I stayed in a motel off Route 79, the kind with flickering signs and questionable hygiene. It smelled like mildew and disappointment, but for the first time in years, I slept like a man with nothing left to lose. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. Bloodshot eyes. Patchy beard. 1,000-yard stare like I'd survived something cosmic. Maybe I had. I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't a father. I wasn't anything. But that emptiness? That was fertile ground. I opened my laptop, checked my bank account, and calculated how long I could live on fumes. Not long. Especially not in this economy. But I had a brain, a network, and a fire inside me that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reinvention. I used to work in data security. Nothing glamorous, just spreadsheets, protocols, audits. But I'd seen things. Backdoors in Fortune 500 systems. Patterns in breaches that nobody was noticing. I knew where the cracks were. I knew what the market ignored. I knew how to make it better. That morning, with cold coffee in hand and a hunger I hadn't tasted since I was 22, I outlined a concept, a hybrid AI-driven cybersecurity platform for small and mid-sized businesses. Simple, scalable, secure, and most importantly, affordable. Big firms had the luxury of multi-million-dollar contracts with IBM or CrowdStrike. The little guys? They were sitting ducks. I was going to build them a fortress. I called it SentryMine. It wasn't flashy. But neither was I anymore. This wasn't about ego. This was about purpose. And the irony wasn't lost on me. I was going to protect others from digital betrayal after having been dismantled by a very personal one. I maxed out 2 credit cards and cashed out my 401k. Friends thought I'd gone off the deep end, and maybe I had. But drowning in grief wasn't going to build a future. So I dove into 20-hour days, coding, researching, pitching, failing, fixing. I lived on black coffee, tuna packets, and YouTube coding tutorials. I watched as my phone lit up with messages from people I used to call family. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I was becoming someone new. Someone unrecognizable even to myself. 2 months in, I had a beta. Clunky, imperfect, but functional. I pitched it to 10 small businesses. 8 ignored me. 1 laughed. 1 said yes. It was a bakery in North Carolina. The owner was a middle-aged woman named Brenda, who had been hacked 3 times in 2 years. She was desperate. I charged her $200 and promised nothing. She cried when I showed her the live threat map I had coded into her dashboard. It was basic, but it showed attempts, real time. She called me a guardian angel in a hoodie. That was the first check CenturyMine ever earned. I kept it in a drawer for months before cashing it. People think success comes from confidence. That's a lie. It comes from desperation, obsession, and an unwillingness to stay down. I wasn't confident. I was broken. But I was moving forward. Every line of code was a stitch in the gaping wound. Every cold email was a scream into the void. Eventually, someone screamed back. 3 months in, I got a message on LinkedIn. A guy named Omar. He was ex-Google, now a VC scout. He said my posts about small business vulnerabilities caught his eye. We talked for hours. About data ethics, user-centric design, the illusion of digital safety. He got it. He believed in the mission. He gave me $150,000 in seed funding. That was the first moment I allowed myself to breathe. The next year was a blur. I hired 3 developers. Remote, hungry, brilliant. We worked out of Slack, Zoom, and caffeine. We launched officially in May. The uptake was slow, then explosive. SMB forums lit up with testimonials. A podcast feature led to 5,000 signups overnight. By the end of year 1, we had $1.2 million in ARR. But I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about meaning. Every time we blocked a ransomware attempt, every time a mom-and-pop shop was saved from a catastrophic breach, I felt something return. Not pride. Not revenge. But peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're finally doing what you were made to do. I still hadn't spoken to her. Or the kids. They weren't mine, I kept telling myself. But the ache said otherwise. Sometimes at night, when the noise died down, I'd wonder if I'd made a mistake leaving everything behind. But then I'd open my inbox, read the hundreds of emails from business owners who could sleep better because of us, and I knew I had found something purer. In losing everything, I had found myself. The $150,000 from Omar felt like oxygen in the early days. We used it ruthlessly. Every dollar went into product, not perks. No offices. No fancy merch. No retreats to align the team. We aligned by working through the night and syncing during 5-minute huddles between bites of microwaved rice and black coffee. I ran everything from a rented room above a garage. I had a mattress on the floor, a single flickering desk lamp, and a whiteboard with 2 words scrawled across it: build trust. That was the core of it. Trust. I didn't have a marketing budget. I didn't have an army of salespeople or a polished VC-friendly founder story. What I had was conviction and a product that worked. And when your software stops a real attack, people tell their friends. Word spread. We onboard 50 businesses in 6 weeks. Then 200. Then 1,000. Most of them didn't even fully understand cybersecurity, but they understood pain. They had been hacked, threatened, held for ransom. We gave them relief. And relief is addictive. I had to scale fast, faster than I was comfortable with. I hired 2 more engineers, a support lead, and a customer success rep who doubled as our community manager. Everyone was remote. Everyone was overworked. But they believed. We were all building something that felt like armor in a world full of daggers. One day, I got a message from Brenda, the bakery owner who had been our first customer. She said, "Because of you, I slept through the night for the first time in 4 years." That hit me harder than our first revenue milestone. But not everything was poetry. With growth came pressure. And with pressure came cracks. I started getting headaches, real ones. The kind that come from too many screens and not enough sleep. I skipped meals. Ignored texts. The only people I talked to were team members and customers. My world was made of pixels and code, dashboards and incident logs. One night, around 2 a.m., I passed out at my desk. I woke up on the floor 6 hours later, Head pounding, body stiff, a Slack message blinking on my screen. Hey boss, server 3's CPU just spiked. You okay? I wasn't. But I said yes. Because when you're the one holding the rope, you don't get to let go. The first betrayal came in Q3. One of our early hires, a guy I'll call Dave, had been acting strange. Missing stand-ups, ignoring tickets. I chalked it up to burnout until I saw an article on a tech blog announcing a disruptive new cybersecurity startup, with features suspiciously similar to ours. Dave had launched a clone. Same architecture. Same code. Hell, he hadn't even changed the color scheme. I wanted to rage. I wanted to sue. But we didn't have the bandwidth. So I did what I always did, I built. We released 3 new features in 2 weeks. Dave's site fizzled within 3 months. That's when I learned, betrayal isn't the end. It's just a shortcut to clarity. I stopped hiring out of desperation after that. Started vetting people not just for skill, but for scars. I wanted survivors, fighters, people who'd tasted failure and kept going. We raised our first real round the following spring. $4.6 million from 2 VCs who understood our vision, and more importantly, didn't want to own our soul. We used the money to harden our infrastructure, expand into Europe, and launch a stripped-down mobile product for non-tech-savvy users. I hired a COO named Eleni. She was ex-Air Force Cyber Command, with a presence that could silence rooms. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it meant something. She brought discipline, systems, a way to grow without collapsing. For the first time, I felt like we weren't just surviving. We were thriving. But something strange happened around then. I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, former colleagues, even her, my ex-wife. Her name popped up in my inbox like a ghost from a former life. The subject line was simple. Are you okay? I stared at it for hours before closing the tab. Because I wasn't ready. Not to forgive. Not to explain. And not to reopen a wound that had finally scabbed over. The kids, I thought about them daily. Not with anger. Not even with regret. Just to wait. I wondered if they missed me. If they asked about me. If they hated me. Part of me hoped they did. It was easier that way. Business exploded that summer. We hit 10,000 customers. Our NPS score was off the charts. We got featured in Fast Company, TechCrunch, even Forbes called us the Shield of Main Street. It felt good. For a second. But something was missing. I had built a company that made other people feel safe, but I hadn't done the same for myself. I didn't have a therapist. I didn't talk about that night in the car. I didn't tell the team why I worked like the apocalypse was coming. They just thought I was intense. Truth was, I was afraid. Afraid that if I slowed down, if I took a breath, I'd remember what I'd lost. And I didn't know if I could survive that a second time. We closed out that fiscal year with $24.3 million in revenue. I bought my first home, not a mansion, just a quiet cabin near the woods. I didn't furnish most of it. Just the essentials. A couch. A coffee machine. A standing desk by the window. Sometimes I'd sit out back at night and just listen to the wind. No voices. No dashboards. No alerts. Just quiet. I started journaling. Something simple. 5 minutes before bed. No rules. Just thoughts. At first, it was mostly work to-dos. Then memories started sneaking in. Riding bikes with the kids. Making pancakes on Sundays. Holding hands at the park. Not all of it was fake. That was the hardest part. Even lies can live in real moments. It was around then that I wrote my letter to the broken ones. I posted it on LinkedIn, not expecting much. It wasn't about tech or business. It was about pain. About starting over when everything you believed in burns to ash. About choosing to build anyway. It went viral. Hundreds of DMs. People from all over the world shared their stories. Divorces. Betrayals. Failures. They didn't want sympathy. They wanted hope. And for some reason, my story gave them that. That was the first time I realized this was bigger than software. I had built a company, but maybe I could build something else too. A movement, a philosophy, proof that you could turn heartbreak into horsepower. You'd think that making millions would feel like redemption, like validation, like proof that leaving everything behind was the right call. But when the numbers hit 8 figures and the accolades started flooding in, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt off, almost like I was watching someone else live this life. The money was real. The success was real. But it still didn't feel mine. Maybe because it hadn't been built for glory. It had been built to survive. And now, survival wasn't the goal anymore. We had just closed a partnership with a massive payment processing company. It tripled our exposure overnight. Traffic surged. Enterprise clients came knocking. My phone rang nonstop. Interview requests, podcast invites, panels. I became the guy, the one who came out of nowhere. They loved the mystery. The quiet founder who turned pain into profit. They didn't know about the nights I still woke up gasping from dreams where I was back in that car, alone, crying into the steering wheel. They didn't know I still hadn't spoken to my kids. That I still read their old texts every few weeks, like rereading a novel you can't stop hoping ends differently. With success came offers. Acquisition proposals from tech giant. One from a massive security conglomerate offered $450 million for a majority stake. They dangled the dream. Early retirement, private islands, board seats, keynote speeches, my name etched into Silicon Valley lore. I could taste the freedom. And the fear. Because if I sold, what would I be? Rich? Sure. But empty? I spent 2 weeks with the offer sitting in my inbox, unopened but glowing like radioactive gold. I flew to Montana during that time. No phone. No laptop. Just silence, fresh air, and a legal pad. I hiked, stared at the stars, and wrote down every reason I had built CenturyMine. Not one of them said, so I could sell it and disappear. I turned the deal down. Not because I didn't want the money, but because I knew, deep in my bones, that my work wasn't finished. I didn't just want to be rich. I wanted to be significant. I wanted to build something that outlived me. Something that mattered. So we pivoted. We expanded our mission. Not just to secure businesses, but to educate them. Empower them. We launched cyber clinics for low-income entrepreneurs. Free audits for nonprofits. We embedded a mentorship program for at-risk youth into our hiring funnel. We started giving equity to employees, not just bonuses. People said I was being too generous. But I wasn't building this for a yacht. I was building it for meaning. Then something happened that I didn't expect. One of my engineers, Mia, brilliant, introverted, never spoke unless necessary, knocked on my virtual office door. She said, "Can I show you something?" I said sure. She opened her screen and showed me an idea. A predictive vulnerability AI that didn't just detect threats, but anticipated them using behavioral patterns and machine learning. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I said, "We're going to build this." And we did. It became the foundation of our enterprise product line. It put us a full year ahead of the competition. And it reminded me that genius doesn't always announce itself. It often whispers. That same month, I made Mia CTO. She cried. I think I did too. While the business hit new highs, my personal life stayed in limbo. Therapy helped. Slowly. I started going every Tuesday. At first, I hated it. I'd sit there, arms crossed, staring at the clock. But something about that silence, that space, started to crack me open. One day, my therapist asked, "Why haven't you reached out to the kids?" I said, "Because I'm afraid they'll hate me." She said, "Would you rather assume rejection or risk reconnection?" I sat with that question for a week. Then I wrote a letter. Not an email. A real letter. Ink on paper. I told them the truth. That I left because I couldn't stay sane. That I loved them. That I didn't know how to process what happened. But that I missed them, deeply, every day. And if they ever wanted to talk, I'd be there. I mailed it. Then I waited. 3 weeks later, I got a text. Just 4 words. "We got your letter." No punctuation. No context. But it was enough. It broke me wide open. I didn't respond. Not right away. I just sat there, holding my phone like it was holy. Because that text wasn't closure. It was a crack in the wall. And sometimes, that's all you need to breathe again. The company hit a $1 billion valuation 6 months after that. We didn't throw a party. We pushed a new update and fixed a bug in the authentication flow. When the headline came out, CenturyMine becomes cybersecurity's newest unicorn, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grateful. Not for the money, but for the journey. For every sleepless night. Every betrayal. Every skipped meal and rejected pitch. Because they made me. And without them, I'd still be the man in the car. Broken, lost, waiting for someone to fix it all. But nobody was coming. So I built the damn rescue team myself. I started mentoring founders after that. Quietly. No press. Just one-on-one calls with people who were where I'd once been. Scared. Scarred. Scrappy. I told them the truth. That the world doesn't owe you a second chance, but you can take one. That your past isn't a prison, it's a forge. That pain doesn't disqualify you, it qualifies you if you let it. I spoke at a university commencement that fall. Not a fancy one. Just a local college with kids who worked part-time jobs to stay enrolled. I stood there, under gray skies, and told them what I wish someone had told me. You can lose everything, your home, your pride, your identity, and still come back swinging. Not because you're fearless, but because you remember who you are when no one is watching. That person? That quiet, stubborn fire? That's the real you. Protect it. Feed it. Trust it. And one day, it'll take you places you can't yet imagine. They gave me a standing ovation. But I didn't need it. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I was just being. You spend years climbing the mountain, every step an act of defiance, every bruise a reminder that you're still alive, and then one day, you look around and realize you've reached the top. But there's no music, no fireworks, just silence, wind, maybe some birds. I hit billionaire status on a Wednesday. It came in the form of a valuation update after our Series D round. The Slack channel buzzed. My executive team sent celebratory gift. My inbox lit up with press requests. But me? I just sat there in the office I finally built. Floor-to-ceiling glass, books I hadn't yet read lining mahogany shelves, and stared at a picture I kept hidden in the top drawer. A photo of me and the kids at the beach years ago. Before the world cracked open. Before the lie. Before I became this version of me. The money didn't feel like revenge. It felt like responsibility. Like I was holding something that wasn't entirely mine. Like I'd borrowed strength from a million silent voices. Everybody who ever got betrayed, lost, overlooked, underestimated, and now I had to give it back. So I started giving. Not performatively. Not for PR. I created the Ashline Initiative, named after my mother's maiden name. We funded early-stage founders from broken backgrounds, single parents, refugees, foster care survivors, people who didn't look good on paper but had fire in their eyes. We didn't just write checks. We gave mentorship, therapy stipends, housing support, a second chance with infrastructure. And it worked. Not just for them, but for me. Because every time I saw one of them rise, I healed a little more. Then the impossible happened. My daughter, Emma, emailed me. Subject line: "Are you free next weekend?" There was no preamble. No emotional overture. Just a simple ask. I stared at that email like it was an artifact pulled from the ocean. Something ancient and powerful and too fragile to touch. I replied instantly, yes, anywhere, anytime. She lived in Portland now. A freshman in college. Studying psychology. We met at a little coffee shop by her campus. And when she walked in, time folded. She looked the same and entirely different. taller, more guarded. But her eyes, those same storm-gray eyes, met mine with equal parts hesitation and hunger. She sat down and said, "I don't know what I want from this." I said, "Neither do I. But I'm here." We talked for 3 hours. About school. About what books she liked. About what music she hated. Not once about the past. Until the very end. She said, "Why didn't you fight for us?" And I told her the truth. Because I didn't know how to fight what I didn't understand. And because I thought disappearing was the kindest version of staying. She nodded. Slowly. Then she said something I'll never forget. "We didn't stop loving you. We just didn't know how to find you." I reconnected with my son a few months later. It was less poetic. He punched me in the chest. Not a full swing, just a shove with a decade of grief behind it. Then we hugged. Long, ugly. Real. We watched a Lakers game in silence after that, and by the second quarter, we were teasing each other like no time had passed. It wasn't forgiveness. Not fully. But it was the beginning of peace. As the company matured, I stepped back. Not out, but up. I brought in a new CEO. Someone smarter, younger, hungrier for the race I had already run. I stayed on as chairman, guiding the mission, protecting the soul. And for the first time in 15 years, I exhaled. I bought a home near the coast. Not big, but open. Quiet. With a guest room for the kids. They visited for the holidays that year. We cooked, laughed, argued over the best movies. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was ours. I started writing a book, too. Not about business. About becoming. The journey from shattered to whole. From lost to found. From rage to reinvention. I called it, The Fire That Built Me. It debuted at number 2 on the nonfiction list. The number 1 slot went to a celebrity chef memoir. I laughed. I never wanted first place anyway. I just wanted to be heard. One night, years after everything, I got a call. It was Omar. "Man," he said, "I still remember that day in the diner. When you pitched me with napkin sketches and wild eyes." I laughed and said, "I wasn't pitching you. I was drowning." "Yeah," he replied. "But damn if you didn't learn how to swim." He hung up. I stared at the ceiling. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Contentment. Not ecstasy. Not adrenaline. Just stillness. The kind that comes after a storm that nearly destroyed you, but left you standing. People ask me now if I'd do it all again. If I'd trade a quiet life for the road I took, the pain, the loss, the brutal climb to $1 billion. And honestly, no. I wouldn't do it again. Because you only get one fall like that. One shattering. One rebirth. But I wouldn't undo it either. Because it made me someone I never would have met otherwise. A man forged in silence. Refined in heartbreak. And rebuilt by the choice to rise. Final line. My husband found out the kids weren't his after 12 years. They whispered. Yes. He cried in the car. Yes, he never came back. But what they didn't say, what they never knew, was that he came back to himself. And that was the beginning of everything.